video. So this month I came out of a huge reading slump. Real life confession time. I didn't read hardly anything in July. I didn't pick up a single book until July 25th, so that's like 3.5 weeks without reading. I don't know why, nothing looked appealing, nothing looked good. So admittedly, 2 of the books on here are going to be books that I read between July 25th and July 31st. I just put them in here because I only read 2 books in July, and I wanted to talk about them because I actually really like both of them. So, but as a comeback for August, I ended up reading 12 books in total. I ended up reading 3,707 pages, which is kind of like, holy crap. I can't remember the last time that I read that much in a month. So let's see what I read. So the first book that I read this month is As Old as Time by Liz Braswell. This is a Beauty and the Beast retelling book. So basically this is like Beauty and the Beast, except what if Belle's mom is the one who cursed the beast? And what if she's actually not dead? So it was kind of neat. I really liked it a lot. I gave it 5 stars. I thought that it was creepy, and I thought that it was interesting, and I thought that it kept really well with the time period, you know, that the story was originally told in. It ended up being about like politics and like laws of the era, and what if magic is real, and do we treat those who have magic differently than we treat those who don't have magic? Are they something to fear? There's a lot of really good questions asked in this book. I really had no complaints about it. 5 stars. The second book that I read this month is The Tao of Pooh by Benjamin Hoff. My best friend gave this book to me for my birthday, which was at the end of July, so I was really happy to pick it up and read it immediately. So this book is basically how you can find influences of Eastern philosophy in some Western literature like Winnie the Pooh. So he talks about how Pooh exhibits a lot of the same like ideas and principles of Taoism. Pooh just kind of lives his day very simplistically, gets done when he needs to get done, doesn't worry, doesn't fret. This is a really cute, you know, quick read. It's a pretty small book, quick read. I thought it was really nice. The author spent some time talking about the principles of Taoism, but if you don't know anything about philosophy, see, I really like this book because I went to school for philosophy, so I thought it was very interesting. But you don't have to have any kind of background in it to know what's going on in the story. He uses really simple examples from like the Winnie the Pooh classic tales. I think I gave this book 4 stars. The next book that I picked up this month was called Show Me All Your Scars, 20 Stories About Having Mental Illness by Patrick Kennedy, I think, if I can read that backwards. This book was okay. I think I gave it 3 or 4 stars on Goodreads. It went through and it just had like a bunch of different short stories that portray different types of mental illness. So they talk about like depression and mania and schizophrenia and things like that. I found some of the stories to be better written than others. There were a couple that I kind of felt myself like struggling to get through, but overall I think that the majority of these stories were pretty spot on portrayals of what it might be like to you yourself or to have a family member experience different types of mental illness. So I thought it was a pretty solid read. The next book that I picked up this month was Trash by Andy Mulligan. So actually this book I read in like I think the 10th grade or something like that, and I saw it at a thrift store and I basically remembered absolutely nothing about it, and so I figured I would pick it up again and give it a reread and see if it was any good. I ended up really liking it, gave it 4 stars. This book is a telling of some boys who live in a third world country, very, very poor. They essentially live in a trash heap, like a trash dump. And they pick through the city's trash and try to find things to recycle so that they can get pesos, so that they can buy food. The whole system is very, very poor, and one day one of the boys finds something in the trash heap, something that the authorities are looking for, and ends up going on this adventure surrounding this mystery of this object that he and his friends find in the trash heap, and nobody's lives are ever the same again. It's a really quick read to get through. I mean, the typeface, I think, is pretty big in this book. And it's kind of neat because the chapters are told from different perspectives. So some of the chapters are told from each of the boys' perspectives, and good read. The next book that I picked up is SlaughterhouseFive by Kurt Vonnegut? I don't know. So it was a classic. I don't really read classics. I don't really like classics. I picked up this book for one sole reason. I have it bookmarked so that I can show you. I picked up this book because several years ago I heard this quote: "Everything was beautiful and nothing hurt." And I had absolutely no idea what piece of literature it came from, who wrote it, what was the context, anything about it. But I have been like obsessed with this quote since I saw it on a Tumblr post like several years ago. And finally, this past year, I learned that it came from this book. And so I thought, well, I'm gonna read this book and I'm gonna see what it's all about. I gave this book 3 stars. I thought that it was a little hard to follow. I didn't really understand a lot of the points that the author was making. He was basically telling about the life of Billy Pilgrim, this guy who went to war. And the book is a little confusing because it jumps to different time periods in Billy Pilgrim's life, but then it also is kind of like, I don't want to say sci-fi, but kind of has some sci-fi stuff going on. Like he goes to this other world called Tralfamadore, and he ends up in this like circus on exhibit for these aliens or these beings or something. And the book like jumps back and forward between like his present and his past and his future. And is he in the war? Is he on Earth? Is he with his wife? You know, that kind of thing. It was just a little hard to follow because I didn't necessarily understand what the point was. Like I finished this book. I mean, it's not a super like big book. I finished this book and I still don't necessarily know, I don't really know like what I was supposed to get out of it. But it was a pretty solid read. There were some parts of it that I enjoyed, and now I know where that quote comes from. The next book that I read this month was called The Christian Atheist by Craig Groeschel. So this book I gave 4 stars to. I didn't think it was bad. It's also not really something that I would typically pick up or read, but I don't know, I was just kind of in the mood for it. So this book is a Christian pastor. He writes about how he became a pastor and how he feels like he lived a lot of his life as a Christian atheist. So as someone who like says that they believe in God and says that they follow like principles of Christianity, but then doesn't actually like act that way. Basically, he was saying that I was preaching all this stuff and not really practicing it. And it's kind of like his story about how this came to unfold and how his connection with God like changed at different points in his life when he was a kid, an adolescent, a young pastor, whenever he had a family, all this kind of stuff. I thought it was interesting because I am a Christian, I'm a Catholic, so that's probably the only reason that I really picked it up. That's not really your kind of thing, or if you're not like really a religious or spiritual person, this would probably be really boring for you. There were a couple points in this book when I felt like he got a little too like preachy for me. I have some complaints about that, but I thought that the majority of the chapters were really interesting, and you know, it was nice to hear about the guy's life and to hear about his faith, how his faith unfolded. The next book that I read this month, I absolutely loved. It was Eleanor Park by Rainbow Rowell. I have never read anything by this author before. This is my first introduction to her, and I thought that this book was fantastic. I absolutely gave it 5 stars, and I thought it was kind of interesting because, I don't know, I mean, you tell me if anybody has read this book before, because like I said, I don't have an introduction to this author besides this book, but it kind of really felt like they, and don't worry, there won't be any spoilers in this. I'm going to talk about it a bit, but I'm not going to spoil anything for you. So it kind of felt like Eleanor, right? She's supposed to be the manic pixie dream girl for Park over here. And, you know, throughout a lot of the book, Park like idealizes her and talks about her, and I love her so much, and this and that, and she's so interesting and quirky and neat and blah, 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 right? But... But at the same time, whenever you get the Eleanor chapters, because this book is told, each chapter has Park and Eleanor's perspective in it. So when you get to the Eleanor parts, she's really like telling Park, this guy that she does like, you know, I'm not all that, I'm not really great, I'm actually kind of, you know, terrible, I'm actually like, I'm not a very nice person, and you know, I'm really not that pretty, and I'm really not, you know, that great, and I don't have very much to offer for you. It was kind of funny because it was almost like she the Manic Pixie Dream Girl, was poking fun at the fact that he is idealizing her. But there were a couple things that I thought really separated this book that made it, I guess I want to say better than like some of the John Green books that I have read. So like Eleanor, right? Eleanor in this book, she comes from such a crappy home, such a crappy environment. Like for 2/3 of the book, she doesn't even own a toothbrush, okay? I mean, it's that kind of like neglectful parenting. I thought that the portrayal of how she handled those situations and how she handled having an abusive stepdad and a neglectful mother were very realistic. I thought that the interaction that she had with her siblings was very spot on. I really appreciated the way that they portrayed that relationship. And I also really like the fact that the relationship between Eleanor and her mom in this book was a little bit different than I've seen some YA books do mother-daughter relationships. So whenever there's like, you know, the mom is kind of like portrayed as, you know, doing her best but kind of falling apart and woe is me and what can I do, and the kids, you know, the kids in those stories a lot of the times they just kind of like, oh, it's okay mom, and you know, pat pat pat, we're gonna be fine, and you know, kumbaya kind of thing, like we'll get through this together. But Eleanor is not like that. Eleanor was not having any of that shit in this book. Eleanor, like, several of the times said to her mom, like, you need to get it together and what you're doing is wrong, and how could you stay with this guy, and look what you've made our lives. Like, she was tough loving her mom. And you know, I think that's really what is needed sometimes. It was really nice to see like a strong female character like that. It was really nice to see her not just like crumble and fall into the same pattern that her mom was falling into. And I have a lot of feelings about the end of this book. I won't say anything about the ending of this book in case you haven't read it, but what I will say is that I like not quite happy endings to books. So like As Old as Time, the Beauty and the Beast retelling, had like a not quite happy ending, and so did this book, and I think that those are some of my favorites because I just don't think that it's realistic for like all these books to have happy endings. Like all this stuff isn't supposed to work out. I was reading something on one of the Rainbow Row's websites, and she was talking about the end of this book, and she basically said something along the lines of like, I don't believe that teenagers get happy endings, I believe that teenagers get second chances. And that was really what this book was about. The next book that I read this month is All the Words Are Yours by Tyler Knott Gregson. This was his Haiku on Love series, so he has two other books, Chasers of the Light and Wildly Into the Dark. I've read both of them, and they're all different poetry books, but this one is specifically just haikus. He does a lot of illustrations with his poetry, so like this is one of my favorite pages. So like the pages here, sorry if it's glaring, the pages here, like they're all laid out differently, and they have just like the handwritten haikus, you know, that he puts on there. He's the photographer and he's the author. I thought that this was good. I mean, it was okay. I gave it 3 stars. I really liked his other 2 poetry books better, if I'm gonna be honest. I think it's just because I'm not like a lovey-dovey kind of person. And the fact that this was all specifically haikus felt a little like repetitive when I was going through it. Like, how many times can you have that like warm fuzzy feeling in a book? And I don't know, maybe that's like somebody's thing, but it wasn't really my thing. So it was fine. I think it was just a stylistic thing, just not really my style. The next book that I read this month was Paperweight by Meg Haston. This is a book about a girl named Stevie who enters into a residential treatment program for anorexia and bulimia. It is her story about going through this treatment program. She's never been to one before. I mean, it was really nice to go along with this journey with Stevie, to see her grow and develop throughout the book and change and sort of come to terms with the fact that I actually have a problem, and so now am I going to do something to get myself better or not? Her dad signed her into treatment. She can't sign out for treatment, 60-day treatment, but she doesn't plan on making it 60 days. She plans on getting to, I think it's like the 24th day or something like that, is the first anniversary of her brother's death, and she plans to kill herself on that day because she believes that she is responsible for killing her brother. So wait, well, what about that? Like, that's quite a hook. That right there, that brief summary is what got me interested in the book. You got through like a lot of this book, like 2/3 of this book, before you figured out what she meant. Like, she kept hinting at it, like, I killed my brother, my brother's dead, this, that, and the other thing, and you're like, well, what happened? Like, is she really this like menacing person? Was there an accident? Did she, you know, was it like, did she figuratively kill him? Did she literally kill him? And then you finally get to the reveal, and it wasn't what I thought it was going to be, and I really like when books keep me guessing. So this was a solid book. If this author writes anything else, I will probably read it. 4 stars. And finally, we are getting down to the last 3 books that I read this month. They were all a trilogy. They were a high fantasy trilogy. I do not read a lot of fantasy. I was really in the mood. And these books, I'll show you them in a second, were totally a cover buy. So the first one was The Golden Compass by Philip Pullman, and look how beautiful this is. This is a gorgeous book cover. We're releasing this new cover art because he is writing Book of Dust. So he's supposed to start a new trilogy set in the Golden Compass world. The trilogy, there's supposed to be 3 prequels to these 3 series books, and the first one comes out in like October or something. I actually read this book when I was in the 5th grade, which is ridiculous if you've actually ever read The Golden Compass. It was way above my skill level. I did not get a lot of what was happening when that was going on. I basically got like the base storyline, but missed a lot of the larger themes, and these was just too hard for me. But I read it in the 5th grade, and I started to read the second one, The Subtle Knife, and just had a really hard time with it because I was so young. That was like 10 years ago. So I picked it, you know, I picked it up and then I put it down and then I was done with it. And I saw these and I remembered really liking it, so I thought maybe I'll give it another go now that I'm older, now that I can understand what's happening, and I am so glad that I did. 5 stars. I thought that The Golden Compass was great. If you don't know anything about it, it follows this young girl who's like 11. Her name is Lyra. She lives in a world where part of your soul is externalized, and they call it a demon, and it's this animal that shapeshifts and follows you around. And she ends up coming into possession of the Golden Compass, which they call an alethiometer. I don't really know how to pronounce it. And you can ask it any question by turning these 3 dials, and you will get an answer by looking at the symbols in the pictures. And there's a lot of larger things going on with this book. So Philip Pullman basically, you know, tells this story about how there's different I guess like views or factions in society. Some of the more scientific folks are at odds with like the church over this problem that's happening in the universe. This problem called dust, which he also calls like dark matter, and like there's several other terms for it in this book. But this takes place in an alternate universe that is similar to ours but not entirely the same. Some of the rules are different. It's roughly set in like the London, England type area. And you know, Lyra goes along and she tries to figure out, you know, what's happening to save some of her friends. They get kidnapped for these experiments that are happening in the Arctic North that nobody knows why or what's being done to these kids. She meets these armored polar bears at Svalbard, which is this town way up north. She gets to meet witch clans and like several other fantastical creatures, and try to figure out, you know, what she can do to help these kids. Her best friend is one of the kids that gets captured, and it's just her story about that, and I thought it was fantastic. So naturally I finished that book, gave it 5 stars, and wanted to move right along to the second one. The second book is called The Subtle Knife, and again, this is such a pretty cover. I'm just gonna talk about it again. I'm gonna show you all 3 of them. So The Subtle Knife. So this is why fantasy, I think, for me at least, gets kind of confusing sometimes. So the Golden Compass book took place in an alternate universe similar to ours. The Subtle Knife takes place most of the time in our universe. So in this series, he talks about how how there's that idea of like infinite, multiple universes all existing simultaneously at the same time. And so we move from Lyra's world into this world, Will's world. Will is the other main character. He's about Lyra's age, and he is the bearer of this thing called the Subtle Knife, which you find out about halfway through the book what that actually is. So after the end of the first book, after Lyra finds out what's happening in the far north, there is some sort of large catastrophe. I won't go into detail in case you want to read it, but basically there's this large hole opened up into several other universes, which these holes exist anyways, but this was like the biggest one, and it was man-made. And she stumbles into this other universe and goes to look for her father, and meets this boy named Will, who was on the run. He was on the run from some people who were coming after him and his mom because she had some documents in their house about his dad, who has been missing since Will was a baby, basically. And so they kind of team up together. She's looking for her dad, and he's trying to find out the truth about what happened to his dad. And they're trying to figure out, you know, what has happened, why these universes are crossing, why have there been holes open, and there's all kinds of crazy things that happen in this book. I also thought that this one was really good. I gave this one 5 stars too. I didn't really have any complaints about it. It is a little shorter than the first book. So, you know, there's not a ton of plot that happens in this book, but really we're piecing a lot of things together to set up for the 3rd book, and I'm totally fine with that. I appreciate the fact that it is a little bit shorter and we didn't put a bunch of filler in it, because I get really annoyed when that happens in books. So then finally, the last book that I actually finished, the Amber Spyglass, which is the 3rd book in the Golden Compass trilogy. Also very beautiful. Sorry if you're tired of seeing the back. I'm not. This book is the perfect reason why I don't read series, because it sucked. It was such a letdown. I was so incredibly disappointed by this book, and really frustrated by it too, because it's the largest one. It's over 500 pages. It's like 518 pages, and it was entirely unnecessary. Basically, this is Will and Lyra trying to clean up this mess, this thing that is happening between all the infinite universes that exist, because otherwise life as we know it may come to an end. There were several characters that we introduced that were entirely unnecessary. They did not need to be there in the storyline, and I felt that they were distracting. Honestly, I thought they were distracting. This book is hard enough to follow because the first book is set in Lyra's world, a world similar to ours but with different principles. The second book is set mostly in Will's world, which is our world. And this 3rd book, you move between several different universes. That's hard enough to follow as it is. We don't need to be adding all of these extra characters that really weren't relevant to the plot, and then you had to try to keep straight, well, what world did they come from, and what roles did they follow by, and you know, what is their purpose. And I just thought it was really unnecessary. Anybody who knows anything about Philip Pullman knows that he hates God, he hates religion, he, you know, thinks it's a bunch of crap, and that's fine. Like, I knew that going in. I don't have any problem with that, and I thought that, you know, the way that he talked about it in the first 2 books that he wrote was very interesting. It was very clever. It was very subtle. You know, it was very thoughtfully done. And in this book, he was just shoving it in your face. He was just shoving in your face the whole entire time. Like, you know, every 4 seconds, God is bad, religion is bad, everything is bad, science only. Like, I get it. There was over 500 pages for you to make that point, and you just didn't need to shove it in like that. I felt like he kept doing that, and I felt like it was very frustrating. It was also distracting to the plot. My other main complaint about this book is that he completely changes the way that Lyra, the main character in the first 2 books, is portrayed. You know, she gets this, it's not really a love interest because they're like 11 or 12 or whatever. When she gets this boy, this main character in the storyline, Will, and, you know, in the first 2 books, Lyra is this strong and fierce and independent kid, and she doesn't let anybody tell her what to do, and she doesn't take any shit from anybody, and, you know, she's very spunky and feisty, and she's not very well refined, and, you know, that's part of her charm. I mean, that's what makes her seem to be so brave and why she can do all of these things. And then she, you know, meets Will, and she's, you know, still the same way in the second book, and then in this book, when their stories become more entwined, she's just like this mushball. Like, she falls apart, and I hate when authors do that. I hate whenever we introduce a male character and then we lose everything, you know, important and sufficient about the female character. She just like completely crumbled underneath him. Oh, Will, what are we gonna do? Oh, Will, this. Oh, Will, that. What? You tell me. I don't know. I'm so afraid. Like, no. Where was my fierce Lyra? Where did she go? What did you do to her? I'm clearly upset about it. You know, I bought this, right, because I really like the Golden Compass, And because I saw, right, he is writing a new trilogy, which is all prequels to these first 3. So do I buy that? Do I read that? I don't know. The first one's coming out in October. His first 2 books from this were really great. This one was really disappointing. You know, I don't know if I necessarily want to be invested in 3 more books. So I guess I'm going to have to figure that out. But all I have to say is that I was very disappointed by this, and I took it to Goodreads to make sure I was not the only one, and a lot of other people were disappointed by this. Were you disappointed by this? Please let me know. So that's it. That's all the books that I read in August. 3,707 pages, 12 books. Oh my god. That was only possible because I'm finally out of school. I'm not starting school this fall, so that's really nice. I graduated and I have a lot more books to read. Now I just wanted to take a second and show you the first book that I'm going to be working on for September, Upside of Unrequited by Becky Albertalli. I don't know what I'm going to read after that. I probably will not read 12 books this month because that was remarkable. I'm sorry that this is so long. I'm going to go now. I will see you later.